There's not much I enjoy more than big sweaty dudes slapping the heck out of each other. Except maybe video games, so combine them. As some of y'all know, WRASSLIN's been slowly taking over my life as I continuously reference it in these videos, and I've been feeling like it's time to open up about some games. Games of the non-WWE variety, the expanded weird universe of wrestling video games. Now, we did talk about a bunch of the WWE games a few years ago, including the Twisted Metal clone Crush Hour and the side-scrolling beat-em-up WWF Betrayal. These games, while ridiculous and sometimes fun, weren't really wrestling video games though. No suplexes, no high spots from the top rope, just cars exploding and The Undertaker speaking.
I live to destroy people like you.
However, there's a plethora of wrestling video games that aren't tied to the WWE, in fact, way more since the beginning of video games. And yes, I'm going to actively now try to say plethora every video, Raheem. Every one. These games dated all the way back to 1983 with Technos' Tag Team Wrestling, a game that didn't use any likenesses, any particular territory, but did in fact have a ref making ridiculous facial expressions. So today, we're gonna focus on these games, the weird and lesser known obscurities that came out over the last 40 years. Why? Because despite watching AEW like 3 times a week now, I can't get enough and it's ruining my life. All I think about is video games, wrestling, Final Fantasy XIV, and Hot Chip. Please help. So yo, it's Austin, and today we're gonna be diving into the vast ocean of weird wrestling video games. We're gonna be seeing some Sting, we're gonna be seeing some anime girls, and we're definitely gonna be hearing that 1, 2, 3. But first, we need to open our eyes and see the world through proper corrective lenses, because it's time for a word from today's sponsor, GlassesUSA.com. GlassesUSA.com are an online retailer that offers glasses and sunglasses at affordable prices. They've got over 9,000 different styles to pick from different brands, be it in-house or designer like Ray-Ban or Oakley. Everything goes up to 70% off, and a complete pair of glasses, which includes frames and lenses, by the way, starts at $30, which is a pretty good price. So today, GlassesUSA.com has sent me 4 different pairs of frames to show off, starting with the ones I'm already wearing, the Revel Tactics, which are a classic look that I enjoy quite a bit and are ones that I've been wearing mostly around the house. This is me. There's also the Muse Cobrams, a blue version of the 70s style glasses I used to wear. These feel nice and light on my head and have a nice color for when I want to spice it up a bit. They've also got prescription sunglasses like the 60s inspired Atoto Araganos, which I feel look pretty cool. But the one I've been joyriding with quite a bit have been the Armani Exchanges, which have this really pretty blue shine to them. I've never had a pair of glasses with a reflective colored lens before, but I like these quite a bit. I would wear them all the time if I could, but then I couldn't see anything inside. Would probably be bad. GlassesUSA.com has a virtual mirror feature on their website, so you can upload a photo of yourself and see what you look like in any of the frames I've shown today. And if you need contacts, GlassesUSA.com actually offers those as well, with 25% off of all contact lens brands. That's AccuV, Biofinity, Dailies, and more. There's a 14-day 100% money-back guarantee, so you can give it a shot with no risk. So if you need new glasses, and let's be real, you probably do, go to GlassesUSA.com using one of my links in the description and give yourself the gift of vision today. Thanks so much to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring the video, but for now, we need to head to the local mall, to the abandoned spot, the arcade. In the 80s and 90s, wrestling and arcade games were like peanut butter and jelly.
I walked through arcades today, and I see absolutely nothing.
Around the same time that Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were dominating the arcades, wrestling was still a huge part of culture. The Super Pro America caricature of Hogan hadn't taken a trip to the Dungeon of Doom yet, and WrestleMania was still in its single digits. WCW wasn't quite starting the Monday Night Wars yet, but we did have Surfer Sting and long-haired Steve Austin. The early 90s were no stranger to WWF wrestling arcade games either, as we had both WWF Superstars and WWF WrestleFest in 89 and 91 respectively. Both games developed by Technos Japan, the dudes who brought us River City Ransom. This area of WWF, the Hulkamania era, was really colorful and the games were reflective of that. You can really tell Superstars was Technos too, because the characters move in such a similar way to River City Ransom or Double Dragon 3. The rosters were small and they both played like punch-kick affairs with a smidge of WRASSLIN here and there, but I mean, come on. Who doesn't like a good old-fashioned arcade beat-em-up? Especially ones where you can body slam people around and hear Bit-Crushed Mean Gene.
They are declaring themselves challengers to your World Championship belt.
Or, maybe not?
No one can beat
But that's WWF/E technically, so moving on. In 1993, Capcom, the masters of the fighting game genre that was taking off, would create a new wrestling fighter featuring the character designs and art of Tetsuo Hara, famous for Fist of the North Star. Capcom, wrestling, Fist of the North Star. It's like a trifecta of perfection, a perfecta. And so, Saturday Night Slam Masters was born. This game was sick. Take the 1v1 format of fighters from this time, toss them into a wrestling ring, and incorporate wrestling movesets and rules. Out of the ring too long, you lose. Get pinned, you lose. Yeah, it's a pretty tough game, but I mean, it's freaking Saturday Night Slam Masters. It's hard to say no when you've got Mike freaking Hager as a playable character. Mike Macho Hager. This was really doing what Capcom did best back in the day, and it's well up there with some of their greatest. Slam Masters just kicks butt, but don't forget about the enhanced tag team version, Muscle Bomber Duo. Oh, that's the best name. There is a much more toned down version on the Super Nintendo as well, and a sequel called Ring of Destruction, Slam Masters 2. However, that's a much more traditional fighting game. Slam Masters is a unique, action-packed thing at a time when most wrestling games were not quite up to that speed. I would love to see another take at Slam Masters one of these days, but it seems unlikely as Capcom's kinda just left it in the vault. But not all arcade games are equal. A year prior to this, in 1992, Taita would make Ring Rage, and wow, this game is ugly. Digitization was all the rage in the early 90s, and Ring Rage is a pure example of why maybe it shouldn't have been. Look, all I'm saying is that if your game looks closer to Pit Fighter than Slam Masters, maybe you messed up. The game itself, it's okay. It's a 2v2 fighter with wrestling elements, except it doesn't really have any depth. Your health drops so fast and it's an insta-pin if you're out. There's barely any moves in the game, and it just sounds irritating to listen to. But hey, at least we got Gunboat Roddy. Can barely hear it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that if you gotta pick just one old school 2D arcade wrestling game to play, you know the one.
Alrighty, let's head to the third dimension. Now, a lot of people consider the early PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 wrestling games to be the tippest of the top, and I'm not gonna disagree with them. However, you did have to be made by a company called Ukes or Aki to be that. There were other games made by other companies, and we gotta talk about those.
Y'all remember Acclaim? I sure do. Be it Extreme G Racing, their weird attempt at a Tony Hawk clone with the BMX XXX, or the game I begged to rent as a child, Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Acclaim was a major player and publisher in the 90s and early 2000s. They especially enjoyed publishing licensed games, but they had their own franchises here and there. I mean, heck, without them, we probably wouldn't have had Burnout or the home versions of Mortal Kombat. The story of their downfall is one of many lawsuits, lots of misleading financial reports, and the wrath of Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. They probably shouldn't have tried to buy advertising space on real tombstones and real graveyards for Shadow Man 2. Now, Acclaim has had a lot of experience with WRASSLIN games, even with the WWE. They also made the awful ECW games on the PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast. But when WWE partnered up with THQ exclusively in the 2000s, Acclaim had to figure out something new. So how about going after all the free agents in the industry and making a game with them? Yeah, 3 poorly reviewed games featuring people in between jobs. Dire, I know, but unfortunately, so were the games. This PlayStation 2 trilogy of games were kind of a death sentence for Acclaim, as Legends 1 and 2 were the last video games that Acclaim Studio Salt Lake City made. And the third one, Showdown's Legends of Wrestling, was the last video game Acclaim published prior to shutting down for good. Unfortunately, despite having huge names like the Hulkster, Macho Man, Jake the Snake, Warrior, and Sting on the cover, Showdown's Legends of Wrestling did little to save that company. If you've ever wanted to hear Bobby the Brain Heenan and Tony Schiavone sound bored out of their mind, well, you can listen to late WCW, but also any of their commentary for this game.
Jake the Snake, setting up the table, set the table!
Obviously, Legends of Wrestling isn't very good. It's filled with all kinds of glitches. The controls feel similar to its predecessors, clunky as hell, and it's hard to understand how any of the wrestlers control. There's a tutorial featuring Bret the Hitman Hart, and it's funny listening to him explain how to play a video game while also sounding like he'd enjoy being anywhere else.
You'll see icons appear as you get close to turnbuckles, the apron,
Not that it'll help much, considering the game kinda just does what it wants.
Bobby Heenan Day in Indianapolis.
2 days after your violation, Ernie. April Fool's.
Speaking of, Showdown might have had the largest and coolest wrestling roster of all time. There's over 70 people from 4 decades of pro wrestling all coming together to beat the crap out of each other. I think it's cool that they threw Andy Kaufman in here, specifically so I can have a dream match featuring him and Eddie Guerrero. You know, the one we all asked for, though some of the models don't quite look right. Cheeky baby, what are you doing? There's a classic versus mode where you'll play through legendary showdowns from the past, all of which carefully omit any details that'll get them into legal trouble. Though I gotta say, brother, that Hulk's looking quite a bit more swole than everyone else. Though he's got nothing on my create-a character, Austin Little from Austin, Texas, and that default scared me until I remembered this game was made in Austin. You gotta love the PlayStation 2 character creators, enabling you to make large chads with a dumpy like this. Surprisingly, this game isn't anywhere near as bad as Legends of Wrestling 2 for the Game Boy Advance, one of, if not the worst reviewed wrestling video game of all time. The same concept, but on the small screen. Let's check it out. That is unfortunate. Anyways, I'm gonna play something else now. Rip Acclaim Austin, former Iguana Entertainment. Iggy's Wrecking Balls was dope.
Let's hop overseas from Texas all the way to Tokyo, Japan. If you play wrestling video games at all, there's like a 90% chance that you have heard of Fire Pro Wrestling. If you take WWE out of the equation, Fire Pro Wrestling is easily the biggest wrestling video game franchise. Human Entertainment and Spike Chunners have been making these games since the 80s, and they're recognized as some of the most simulation-like, customizable, and toppest tier wrestling games on the planet. The latest released, Fire Pro Wrestling World, started as an early access title for the PC, but has become one of the most celebrated wrestling games today. But it's definitely for a very specific type of person. Fire Pro leans heavily into the simulation side of things, rather than anything arcadey. If you're down with the second dimension, it's got the most robust customization this side of, well, anything really. The only franchise more football manager than this would be Total Extreme Wrestling, which is pretty good really, just not for everybody. But Fire Pro has its culty fan base, and I totally get it. Make that dream roster, make them fight, and have a good time. Or play the Super Nintendo one Suda51 wrote the story for, and have a sad time. A very, very sad time. Despite only a fraction of the games coming stateside, I still hear people talking about them. I played the PlayStation 2 game, Fire Pro Wrestling Returns, when it came out here in 2007, but I didn't really get it. Not only was I not into wrestling enough to appreciate it at that point, but these games are not newbie friendly. However, before the latest one, they did it bad. A game simply called Fire Pro Wrestling on the Xbox 360. Finally, a use for Xbox 360 avatars. Point for Microsoft. And no, this is not a spin-off. This is developed by Spike Chunsoft. They did this. There's no real narrative here, no real direction for anything happening. You play as your avatar, you start off by wrestling your coach, then your neighbors, then your grandparents. You unlock a crazy amount of abilities you can assign to individual buttons. There's hundreds of moves and outfit options. It's just, unfortunately, completely unidentifiable to its source material. They dropped the hardcore sim in favor of a chance-based RNG system. They made everything extremely casual and turned what was a niche franchise for a very niche audience into an Xbox Live Arcade $10 nightmare. It's glitchy as heck, it feels awful to control, you like clip through stuff. The frames drop if there's more than 2 characters on the screen, and I mean, it's Xbox avatars. Who wanted that? In 2021, the leaderboards don't work, so every post-match is spent waiting on the game to try and contact a server for like a minute and then failing. Exciting, I know. Until Fire Pro World, this was probably the most eyes one of these games had on it in modern times. It was a low-priced digital-only game that could potentially be picked up by anyone, but they totally dropped the ball and made a game untrue to its roots and kind of killed the franchise for half a decade. But at least if you had weird avatar props, you could see that in your entrance, no matter how cursed it is. Is this canon? Anyone who watches my channel knows I love to talk about licensed games, and thankfully, wrestling video games don't disappoint. Unless it's a Nacho Libre on the DS. Yes, it's real. I saw Nacho Libre in theaters. I kinda liked it at the time, but I was also 16 and haha Jack Black.
And beneath a man, we find his nucleus.
Releasing a few months after the film in 2006 would come Nacho Libre for the DS. This is like a fever dream nightmare. It follows a similar path of the movie, but every cutscene is like a still shot from the movie where they awkwardly Photoshop and warp things around. It's like a more cursed version of a Monty Python animation bit. This is a wrestling game, however, which means there's gonna be some sports entertainment, and it's not very good. I think this one barely counts, to be honest. It's got a wrestling system and a mode where you can fight against characters from the film, but it might be more fun and interesting to slap yourself in the face. Only like half of the game is wrestling anyways. There's a bunch of mini games that you have to play to get through the story mode, which is only 30 minutes long, by the way. Ah yes, my favorite genre of video game, the 30-minute long licensed handheld one, joining the likes of Napoleon Dynamite. There's actually a decent amount of licensed wrestling games, but you know, we don't have to talk about Simpsons Wrestling or Hulk Hogan's Main Event, mostly because I was too lazy to bring out my Kinect only to suffer. Sorry guys.
So yeah, let's talk about something good instead. What comes to mind when I say wrestling anime?
Hopefully, it's this.
Big bad boys from outer space. Get a body slam, the human race.
Ultimate Muscle, or as it's known in Japan, Kinnikuman Man, is awesome. It's a story about a himbo superhero who has to wrestle to save the universe. It's over the top, it's been running on and off since the 70s, and it's one of the highest selling manga over there. Its sequel series, Kinnikuman Man the Second Generation, made its way west via 4Kids. A awful combination, I know. And Ultimate Muscle was born. It was also a huge failure in Japan and got canceled early on, despite doing pretty okay in the States. It's a shame, because I always thought the show was great. Even the dub was fine. And somehow it got not one, but multiple Western video game releases. And they were pretty good, especially the GameCube one. So let's focus on Ultimate Muscle Legends versus New Generation. This is another one of those 4-player anime fighters, but there's something a little different about this one. Is it perhaps the speed of it? Is it maybe the colorful anime look? Or is it maybe possible that the developer kicks ass? Ultimate Muscle was made by Aki Corp, now Sin Sophia, who brought us gems like WCW/NWO Revenge or Def Jam Fight for New York. That actually makes a lot of sense, because once you play it for 5 minutes, it feels good and it feels familiar. Visually, it looks great. The feel of everything is snappy and just the right amount of jank where it doesn't feel bad, but also accessible. The story mode dives into the anime and has bits of personality for each of the characters. It's a well-made fighting game that's definitely more wrestling themed than feeling, but even then it works. It's totally worth checking out despite the campy nature of the 4Kids dub. Heck, that might even enhance it.
I'm gonna be talking about one more licensed game today, and it's a bit on the trashy side. Now, in the late 90s, early 2000s, with ECW and hardcore wrestling really starting to take mainstream notice, you were gonna see a lot of people trying to capitalize on that, and you know I'm talking about Backyard Wrestling, featuring Insane Clown Posse.
Y'all remember Eidos? Well, before they merged with Square Enix and became a proper Marvel game factory, they used to publish all sorts of weird stuff. I'd never say that they were a group that was known for doing fighting or wrestling games, but they sure teamed up with ICP in order to make Backyard Wrestling 1 and 2. 2 games filled with a bunch of indie and fictional wrestlers doing a Jerry Springer thing while leaning into a gameplay more similar to Power Stone than your Bring the Pains. These were developed by Paradox Development, the people that brought us X-Men Mutant Academy and Wu-Tang Shaolin style, by the way. They made themselves a super jank arena fighter that, like that style of wrestling, has a lot less in common with what you'd see in the squared circle. Just dudes beating the crap out of each other in a diner or, well, the backyard. But one starring New Jack, Vampiro, the Sandman, both members of Insane Clown Posse, and Enter WK.
This is Backyard Wrestling 2!
Clearly, this kind of feels like a corporation working with a group of indie wrestlers and people to try and cash in on the mainstream hype of wrestling at the tail end of the Attitude Era. And it definitely plays like that as well. I can see the passion in certain aspects, but it's also hard to take seriously. But you know what? Backyard Wrestling seems like the type of games you'd play with a sibling when you're like 12 to 16 years old, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you both have totally ridiculous creative characters. Or, just make Blanca, I guess. I have no imagination.
Well, That was filthy. Shout out to Violent J, take care of yourself. Next up, we're gonna be moving on to the controversial world of women's wrestling, which, as a new fan, is some of my favorites.
For anyone who hasn't kept up with wrestling in the slightest, the mere thought of women's wrestling probably puts a chill down your spine. For a very, very long period of time, mainstream American women's wrestling wasn't treated with any respect whatsoever. Bra and panty matches everywhere, 2 to 4 minute bouts on television, and maybe a pay-per-view if you were like 1 or 2 people. And for some reason, cuckolding stories everywhere. Yeah, this is good television right here. With rare exceptional stars like Chyna, Bull Nakano, Alundra Blaze, and Lita, only in recent years have Western audiences truly embraced the women's revolution. Talent like Asuka, Britt Baker, Bianca Belair, and Becky Lynch, and Charlotte Flair really stand out. And it helps that they're given storylines that aren't necessarily written by a 70-year-old man.
I'm starting to feel it now. It's starting to feel good.
However, you teleport all the way to the other side of the planet, say Japan, and it's a completely different story. Women's Japanese wrestling has been a mainstay over there for years, with the biggest stars of the 90s even making the occasional trip to WCW back in the day. One of which was Cutie Suzuki. She was one of the big stars of Joshi Pro Wrestling, or JWP, back in the day, a women's only promotion that until its closure in 2017 was one of the longest running around. She would actually get her own video game, Cutie Suzuki no Ringside Angel, which is actually the first video game based on women's pro wrestling, starring Cutie herself with a bunch of fictional characters like Gunzo Yama or Halloween E. Sato, with her finisher, the Scorpion Deathlock. You sure about that? This, like a majority of the wrestling games at the time, are a kind of weird and plotting affair with slower gameplay, dumpy sound effects, but also filled with a ridiculous amount of charm. And, whatever this is. If you want to go full-on anime, there's Wrestle Angels, a franchise that dated itself as old as the PC 98 in Japan. Let's take the concept of women's wrestling, make it extremely anime, and combine it with a hybrid card game simulation thing. Yeah, be it on PC, Super Nintendo, or PlayStation 2, despite showing us a bunch of anime girls and leotards doing grapples, it was able to do so without a dumb amount of fan service. Yay! This franchise and concept alone is prime gacha mobile game bait, and we somehow haven't seen it come to life yet. Maybe we keep it that way and leave it at that.
Unfortunately, I'm not gonna let you guys get out of here unscathed, so Rumble Roses.
She looks wild. Wild. Wild.
Geez. Oh, Rumble Roses. A game with the most hardcore of identity crises. We brought up Yuke's earlier, the video game company heralded as the toppest tier of wrestling games back in the day. While you might look at Rumble Roses and think, oh no, it's one of these, I need to point out that it uses the exact same engine as WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. Yeah, the wrestling video game that to this day is still considered the GOAT by a lot of people. It has a very similar control scheme with the omnidirectional grapple system and that glorious arcadey feel. Just instead of a giant sweaty Brock Lesnar, you get a, well, you know. Rumble Roses is total campy nonsense, and it knows what it is. Not only do you have nonsensical storylines that include robot women with rocket guns, but you've also got horrendously awful voice acting where people are talking trash to each other, and it doesn't sound like it.
Cowgirl has teats more magnificent than my sheep.
What? Wait, what? Peggy 12, somehow. Typically, when you play one of these horny gamer games, as I do occasionally, you don't really expect the gameplay to be good. But for some reason, Yukas really tried. I mean, hell, when you finish one of the story modes, you get this really wholesome thank you message from the developers after the credits, being like, hey, we just wanted to have fun, we hope you enjoyed it. My favorite part of this game was easily the whole heal and face system. You can take on personal challenges to increase your heal or face levels, and when you max it out, you unlock an alternative version of that character. Essentially the good and evil gimmicks they have. You'll no longer be Dixie Clements, but Sergeant Clements. The wrestling nerd in me loves this. It also just happens to have really good water physics. Maybe this was an attempt to make a popular franchise they could rely on that wasn't licensed, but Rumble Roses is pretty dang fun to play. The grapple system has fun cinematics that happen, the fights have a big impact to them. The only thing really missing here are like tag team and gimmick matches. I mean, I guess you have mud matches, but like, that's not throwing someone through a table. Since this was published by Konami, each of the levels have advertisements for other Konami games in the background. I gotta say, it's jarring seeing a giant ad for Metal Gear Solid 3 in the background while doing a running DDT, but it is what it is. Konami would put out a sequel to Rumble Roses XX for the 360 a few years later, but it failed to impress in the same manner. And it doesn't help that this time around, Yukes was not involved. The original is definitely the way to go between the two. If you look beyond the filthy stuff that so much of you probably enjoy anyways, you'll see a game that's a love letter to wrestling. There's women doing real moves here, some of which look awesome. There's championship belts to unlock and defend, silly stories, and enough heel face gimmicks to last a long time. That and it's got a killer soundtrack, of which I wouldn't expect anything else from Konami. Akira Yamaoka, Michiru Yamane, come on.
We're beginning to approach the end here, and I'm sure a few of you have noticed a glaring omission from this video, so I suppose it's time to talk about Dickie.
Dickie is a legend. I think. Real name Matt Dickie, this Brit has been solo developing video games for over 20 years. 20 years of all kinds of video games, be they shooters, weird religious things, prison simulators, or of course, wrestling. This dude's been making stuff by himself for so long, and of course, I would be remiss if I didn't also say this stuff is Kasuge Central. I first heard about this dude when I saw Hard Time back in the day with its weird, procedurally generated story happening around you as you try to survive in a prison. Truly, you're just trying to serve your hard time. Tee-hee. Yo, you ever wanted to play as Jesus? Yeah, it's all so bad, but like a charming bad. Dickie's gone on record himself stating that he's, quote, single-handedly responsible for the worst games ever to be enjoyed by millions of people. And well, I totally agree. Just like any B-movie or crappy cassette game, in the right mindset, it's real easy to have fun with anything.
So that brings us to the end, with one final game made by Dickie, who has made like 30 different games, which is very impressive, but only one in 2020. Wrestling Empire.
Wrestling Empire isn't Dickie's first WRASSLIN rodeo. He's probably most known for Wrestling Revolution 3D, and Empire is a slightly more advanced version of that. This game's like a combination of the WWE 2K presentation, the customization of Fire Pro Wrestling, and the manager aspects of Total Extreme Wrestling. You can create a character and play through the career mode where you'll play through what feels like a randomly generated story. You can also be a booker as well, where you'll attempt to book shows and make your territory grow. There's also dollar store versions of every wrestler you can think of. Oh, hey look, it's Asuka. Nice. Wrestling Empire, like every Dickie game, is the most supreme uber Eurojank you can possibly imagine, but that really works in its favor. There's so many weird shenanigans that can happen that'll keep the experience fresh or make you laugh on the sheer absurdity of it all. Or you can just launch a 49-man battle royale, load up the ring with max explosions, and well, I think I broke it. You can either do that or make a wave of bodies that look like goo from Princess Mononoke. I'd never sit here and say Wrestling Empire feels good to control or that it's a blast to play. It's something you definitely need to place a massive asterisk onto. It's got the same energy as a bunch of dudes sitting in a circle being like, yo bro, smell this. That chaotic, complete juvenile nonsense that we do and enjoy anyways because we're a bunch of morons. It's also somehow like one of the most stable wrestling video games on the market currently. In a world where massive AAA, quote, sports entertainment games are currently the shits, Wrestling Empire stands out as being a game that functions. And it's on the Switch. Good job, one human being. This bad boy's still getting updates with new moves, new mode updates, and well, more Dickie. And for a very specific type of person, it's a grand old time. Maybe it borrows a bit heavily on aspects and characters from reality, but there's something fun about playing a janky wrestling game, seeing your performance on the business side of things, and also looking at these these Uncanny Valley models promo at each other. It's uniquely bad, but in the same sense, uniquely fun. Give this one a shot if you're cool enough to appreciate a real 10 out of 10 game.
And well, that's all I got for today. I'm sure a lot of you guys can tell that I've become quite a wrestling fan over the last few years, and at this point, I'm just really excited for the new AEW game that's coming out, considering it's made by UCAS, and take, SmackDown or Rumble Roses with like 15 years of video game enhancements, and I'm like, yeah, bring it, let's go. If there's any cool wrestling games that I missed, and I'm sure there's a couple, please drop them down in the comments below because I would love to check them out. And also, MJF's my boy, and so is Adam Page. Y'all come back to Dallas, I'll bring another stupid video game sign, it'll be a good time. It won't be about Balan Wonderworld this time. Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when I actually do talk about the big anime video game that I wanted to talk about, but it was too big to talk about for the week that I had to do it, so yeah.
Thank you all so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, Brandon Howell, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Darren Newton, DX Buster, David Molnar, GM Pinks, Irrational, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Karen Arter, Nick Irving, P-Funk, Randall Bentley, and Ryan Talbert. Thank you all so much for your generous support. Hello, it is me, the man who makes the videos. I am here, speaking to you, words, encouraging you to click the subscribe button and potentially follow me on other social media platforms. Also, here's a picture of my kitty cat, haha. Maybe this will encourage you to click the subscribe button. Hello. A new video coming out next week, and possibly the week after that. I'm really excited for what's coming up, so stay tuned. And watch AEW, it's good.